London, the 24th of December 2025. In the cold, frost-shrouded hours of Christmas Eve, a time historically reserved for messages of warmth, unity, and the soft-focus optics of family harmony, Buckingham Palace delivered a broadcast that effectively dismantled decades of royal precedent. This was not the typical festive greeting the public had come to expect. It was a clinical, legally ironclad decree that signaled the end of an era. Authorized directly by King Charles III and countersigned by the most senior constitutional advisors of the Privy Council, the statement announced what many global observers believed would never come to pass: the definitive and irreversible removal of Prince Harry's ducal titles and his total, structural excision from the royal fold. This was not a family grievance being aired for public consumption. It was an institutional amputation performed with surgical precision. The era of elasticity, of recollections may vary, and of the Crown's quiet, stoic endurance has officially expired. The document, which is already being analyzed by legal scholars as a landmark of constitutional defense rather than a mere personal rebuke, marks the exact moment when King Charles III chose the survival of the 1,000-year-old monarchy over the survival of his relationship with his second son. For years, the British public and the global community have watched an agonizing, slow-motion collision between two fundamentally incompatible systems: the ancient tradition of duty-bound service and the modern, high-intensity machine of commercialized grievance operated from California. By late 2025, that collision reached its terminal point. The palace's statement was stark and unapologetic, framing the issue as one of institutional integrity. The Crown cannot coexist with a parallel narrative that profits from its systemic destabilization. Association with the monarchy is a function of lifelong service, not a commodity to be leveraged for market escalation or media entertainment. The shockwaves currently vibrating through the United Kingdom are not merely about the loss of titles or the change in a birthright. They are about the sudden, sharp restoration of sovereign authority. For 5 years, the Sussexes operated in what palace insiders called a gray zone, relying on royal symbolism and the prestige of their titles to secure multi-million-dollar contracts, while simultaneously portraying the institution as a source of structural trauma. This ambiguity created a dangerous and unsustainable precedent, suggesting that the Crown was a brand to be utilized for personal gain rather than a constitutional pillar to be protected. King Charles, a man historically characterized by his soft heart and a persistent, fatherly longing for reconciliation, has finally drawn a line in ink that cannot be erased. This is the final decision, a term used within the inner circles of the palace to signal that there are no more paths for negotiation, no more room for half-in, half-out arrangements, and absolutely no more tolerance for the instrumentalization of royal proximity. Behind the clinical language of the decree lies a profound and perhaps permanent psychological shift within the heart of the British monarchy. The catalyst for this move was not a single interview or a solitary book, but the cumulative and accelerating erosion of institutional legitimacy caused by repeated public assaults. When the media interventions from California began to target not just the king, but the very moral foundation and reputation of the future monarchy under Prince William and Catherine, the risk moved from the personal to the existential. The king was advised by the highest levels of the constitutional establishment that to remain silent was no longer a sign of royal restraint, but an abdication of his primary duty, to protect the crown for his successor. By acting with such finality on Christmas Eve, Charles has provided a defensive architecture for the next reign, ensuring that William will not be haunted by the same commercialized conflicts that have marred the early years of the Caroline era. The message to the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and the world is unmistakable. The monarchy has stopped apologizing for its existence and has started reasserting its boundaries with a cold, governing clarity that leaves no room for doubt. The atmosphere within the ancient stone walls of Windsor and Buckingham Palace in the wake of the King's decree has been described by insiders not as one of jubilant victory, but of somber, bureaucratic finality. There is a sense that a long, festering wound has finally been cauterized. To understand why this decision is so foundational, one must look past the headlines and into the silent, decisive corridors of power where Prince William operates. While King Charles III remains the sovereign who signed the document, palace sources confirm that the defensive architecture of this move was largely engineered by the Prince of Wales. William, who has spent the last 5 years observing the systematic commercialization of his family's private pain, has reportedly reached a state of total psychological separation from the Sussex narrative. For the future king, this was never about sibling rivalry. It was about the cold, hard mathematics of institutional survival. He recognized, perhaps before his father did, that a monarchy that allows itself to be treated as a reality television subplot will eventually lose the dignity required to sustain a constitutional democracy. The internal deliberations that led to this Christmas Eve shock were characterized by a new, unyielding doctrine: the end of negotiation. For years, the palace's strategy was one of containment and quiet diplomacy, hoping that the public's appetite for royal drama would eventually wane. However, the data suggested the opposite. By repeatedly framing their grievances as a systemic moral failure of the monarchy, the Sussexes were not just telling their truth, they were actively eroding the crown's legitimacy among younger generations and international audiences. William's intervention was centered on a singular, powerful argument: the crown cannot be a defendant in a trial conducted by streaming platforms. By stripping the titles and enforcing a total structural separation, William has effectively removed the commercial oxygen that the Sussex brand requires. Without the formal association with the crown, the narrative of exiled royalty loses its primary currency. This is the doctrine of insulation, a strategic move to place the working monarchy behind a shield of clinical silence that no interview or memoir can penetrate. Central to this shift is the protection of Catherine, the Princess of Wales. Palace records and internal briefings indicate that William viewed the public naming and characterization of his wife in recent Sussex projects as a red line that demanded an institutional response, not just a personal one. Catherine has become the monarchy's most vital asset, representing a disciplined adherence to duty that stands in direct opposition to the culture of oversharing. By allowing the Sussexes to remain half-in with their titles, the palace was inadvertently allowing Catherine to be used as a foil in a commercial narrative. The king's final decision ends this dynamic. It signals that the Princess of Wales will no longer be left exposed to character assassination under the guise of personal testimony. This move is as much about protecting the future queen as it is about punishing the errant prince. It is a message to the world that the inner sanctum of the monarchy is once again a private space, governed by rules of loyalty and discretion that are not for sale. As the legal ramifications of the decree begin to take hold, the focus shifts to the constitutional permanence of the act. This was not a trial period or a temporary suspension. It was a redefinition of what it means to be a member of the royal family in the 21st century. The king has effectively codified the principle that royal status is a contract of service, and when that contract is breached by the monetization of institutional secrets, the status is revoked. This is the harsh reality that now faces the Sussexes in California. They have transitioned from being members of the family who are currently away to private individuals with no institutional standing. The removal of the titles is the physical manifestation of a deeper spiritual eviction. For the British public, the shock is tempered by a growing sense of relief, a feeling that the crown has finally stopped being a victim of its own family drama and has reclaimed its role as the ultimate arbiter of its own destiny. The line has been drawn not in anger, but in the cold, indelible ink of sovereign duty. The silence emanating from Montecito in the immediate aftermath of the king's decree has been more telling than any prepared statement could ever be. For the first time since their departure in 2020, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, now stripped of the very identifiers that anchored their global brand, find themselves facing a crisis of commercial viability that no public relations firm can solve. To understand the gravity of this moment, one must recognize that the titles were never merely decorative. They were the essential access codes to the highest levels of the attention economy. High-value contracts with streaming giants and international publishers were predicated on one thing: proximity to the British crown. By severing that link with clinical finality, King Charles III has effectively pulled the plug on the Sussexes' primary source of institutional oxygen. Without the formal weight of the monarchy behind them, Harry and Meghan are no longer exiles in the eyes of the market. They are simply celebrities in an overcrowded and increasingly indifferent field. This is the moment where the business model of grievance meets the reality of reputational atrophy. Sources close to the California operation describe a scene of profound destabilization. While Prince Harry's reaction is reportedly one of personal devastation, viewing the removal of his birthright titles as a final rejection by his father, Meghan Markle's team is focused on the cold mathematics of brand survival. The tactical restraint they have shown in the last 48 hours is not born of a desire for reconciliation, but of a desperate need to assess the damage. They are acutely aware that the palace's new insulation doctrine has removed the very arena on which their influence relied. Their strategy for years was built on a tit-for-tat cycle. An allegation from California would trigger a reaction or a meaningful silence from London, which would then provide material for the next interview or documentary. By declaring an end to elasticity and refusing to engage in counter-dialogue, the palace has denied them the conflict required to sustain public interest. Controversy requires two participants to trend. The Crown has chosen to stop playing. The implications for their upcoming commercial ventures are catastrophic. Industry analysts suggest that major platforms are already recalculating the value of their association with the Sussexes. In the brutal logic of Hollywood, calm reflection does not generate revenue, only escalation does. However, any further escalation from California now risks validating the palace's core argument that the Sussexes are instrumentalizing their royal history for profit. They are trapped in what strategic consultants call a diminishing returns loop. To stay relevant, they must produce royal content. But to produce royal content without royal titles makes them appear as outsiders peering through the glass, rather than insiders sharing a truth. The Sussex exception, the ability to operate as a private commercial entity while leveraging royal symbolism, has been systematically dismantled by the king's hand. They are no longer the architects of their own narrative. They are now subjects of a boundary they cannot cross. Furthermore, the king's decision has created a vacuum that the Sussexes cannot fill with mere celebrity status. The royal brand is a product of continuity, history, and constitutional function elements that cannot be replicated in a home studio or on a red carpet. As the British public consolidates its support behind the King and the Prince of Wales, the international community is beginning to view the Sussexes as a cautionary tale of what happens when personal grievance is prioritized over institutional duty. The king did not seek to humiliate his son. He sought to insulate the monarchy from a pattern of conduct that threatened to normalize public attacks as entertainment. In doing so, he has left Harry and Meghan in an uncomfortable corridor. If they continue their current strategy, they deepen their estrangement. If they retreat, they lose their commercial value. The final decision was not just a legal act, it was a total recalibration of the power dynamic, leaving the crown steadied and the Sussexes adrift in a sea of their own making. While the global conversation remains fixated on the exclusion of the Sussexes, a far more significant transformation is occurring within the inner sanctum of the British monarchy. The elevation of Catherine, the Princess of Wales, from a supporting figure to the institution's primary moral and strategic axis. The king's final decision regarding Harry's titles was not made in a vacuum. It was the final component of a larger institutional reset designed to center the future of the crown around Catherine's disciplined adherence to duty. To the casual observer, Catherine represents the familiar face of royal tradition, but to constitutional insiders, she has become the ultimate defensive asset. Her survival of the intense narrative pressures of 2024 and 2025, coupled with her stoic refusal to engage in the attention economy, has provided the monarchy with a blueprint for longevity that stands in direct opposition to the celebrity-driven model of California. The king has recognized that the survival of the monarchy in a digital age depends not on winning arguments, but on projecting an image of unshakable, silent constancy. Catherine is the physical manifestation of that principle. This shift in Catherine's role is not merely performative, it is profoundly administrative and policy-driven. Since the definitive departure of the Sussexes, Catherine has quietly assumed a significant role in the internal reviews of staff welfare, media protocols, and the psychological boundaries between private life and public service. She is no longer just a participant in the royal machine. She is one of its primary architects. Sources within Kensington Palace suggest that Catherine's influence on Prince William's hardening stance cannot be overstated. She is the one who understands, perhaps more than anyone else, the psychological cost of exposure. By choosing a path of absolute discretion, she has effectively decommodified her own narrative. In a world where every personal struggle is packaged for a streaming service, Catherine's refusal to monetize her proximity to power has accrued a rare and potent form of moral authority. She doesn't seek to be relatable in the modern sense. She seeks to be reliable in the constitutional sense. This distinction is the core of the palace's post-2025 media doctrine. The crown does not compete for attention. It outlasts it. The king's decree serves to further insulate Catherine from the parallel commercial narrative that has sought to use her as a foil for the last 5 years. By removing Harry's titles and enforcing a total structural separation, Charles has ended the dynamic where Catherine could be publicly critiqued or contextualized by family members operating as commercial entities. The monarchy has effectively declared that Catherine is off-limits to the market. This is a strategic move to ensure that the future queen consort is never again dragged into a personality contest with those who do not share her commitment to institutional silence. For William, protecting Catherine's dignity is synonymous with protecting the dignity of the crown itself. He views any attack on her character as a direct assault on the stability of his future reign. This is why the separation had to be final and irreversible. The palace could no longer tolerate a situation where the future queen was being treated as content for a rival media ecosystem. As Catherine prepares to step into her role as the most influential woman in the British establishment, the public's perception of her has undergone a radical recalibration. She is no longer seen through the lens of a commoner who married into the firm, but as the woman who saved it. Her approach, disciplined, quiet, and visibly committed to duty, has reshaped the public's expectations of royal conduct. While the Sussexes offered drama, Catherine offered display. While they offered grievance, she offered endurance. The Catherine Doctrine is now the gold standard for the modern monarchy. Service without spectacle. By centering the institution around her, King Charles and Prince William are betting that the public's eventual fatigue with celebrity truth-telling will lead them back to the quiet, dignified stability that Catherine represents. She is the moral anchor that allows the crown to weather the storm of the Sussex conflict, proving that in the long game of history, silence is not just a virtue, it is a sovereign weapon. Behind the heavy, oak-paneled doors of Sandringham House, in a room usually reserved for the quiet leisure of the festive season, the atmosphere during the final week of December 2025 was more akin to a high-stakes constitutional court than a family retreat. This was the location of what insiders are calling the Sandringham Summit of Finality. Seated around a long mahogany table were not just the king and his heir, but a clinical assembly of the monarchy's most powerful administrative minds. The private secretaries, the Lord Chamberlain, and senior legal counsel specializing in constitutional law and reputational risk. These men and nunvat in gray suits were tasked with answering a singular, existential question for the British state. At what precise point does the personal conduct of a prince become a structural threat to the crown? The conclusion they reached was unanimous, forming the legal bedrock of the king's decree. They identified that the Sussexes had moved beyond routine criticism into the instrumentalization of grievance for commercial gain, a breach of the unwritten contract that governs royal status. The legal briefings presented to King Charles III were cold and devoid of familial sentiment. They outlined a pattern of narrative escalation where the value of the Sussex brand was directly tied to the disparagement of the monarchy. The constitutional advisers argued that by allowing Prince Harry to retain his ducal titles while simultaneously operating as a commercial entity in Hollywood, the palace was inadvertently legitimizing a rival court. This created what legal experts called constitutional friction, a situation where the symbolism of the crown was being traded in a market that the crown itself could not control. To rectify this, the advisers established a set of red lines that could never be uncrossed. First among these was the principle that royal status cannot be selectively invoked. It is an all-or-nothing commitment to the state. By stripping the titles, the king was not just punishing a son. He was correcting a legal anomaly that threatened to undermine the very definition of a constitutional monarchy in the 21st century. King Charles III, traditionally a man of nuanced emotions and a desire for harmony, reportedly listened to these briefings with a fixed, somber resolve. Sources present at the meetings suggest that the king's primary concern was the normalization of betrayal. If a prince could monetize the internal secrets of the palace without consequence, then the very concept of royal discretion would cease to exist. The king recognized that his role as the fountain of honor required him to protect the prestige of the titles he bestows. To allow Harry to remain a duke while he systematically attacked the institution that granted the title was seen as a logical and moral contradiction that the king could no longer absorb. This was the moment the king's personal grief was sublimated into his sovereign duty. He chose to be the protector of the realm first and a father second, realizing that the survival of the institution depended on this cold, administrative clarity. The resulting document was not a press release. It was a boundary-setting instrument designed to endure for generations. It codified the Sandringham Doctrine, which states that any member of the royal family who chooses a private commercial life must forfeit all institutional standing and symbolic markers of royal authority. This ensures that the crown remains insulated from the volatility of the attention economy. For Prince Harry, the implications are legally absolute. The removal of the HRH style and the ducal titles effectively removes him from the order of precedence, placing him firmly in the realm of private citizenship. This is the structural separation that William had advocated for, a clean break that allows the working monarchy to move forward without the constant shadow of a parallel narrative. As the ink dried on the decree at Sandringham, the message to the world was clear. The monarchy is not a reality show that can be negotiated. It is a governed institution that sets its own terms. The era of ambiguity is over, and the era of the regulated crown has begun. As the immediate shock of the king's decree begins to crystallize into a permanent reality, the focus of the British establishment and constitutional scholars has shifted decisively toward the man who will ultimately inherit the consequences of this fracture, Prince William. To understand the future of the British monarchy under his eventual reign, one must understand the doctrine of discipline that William is currently constructing within the shadows of the current Caroline era. While King Charles III may have been the one to sign the final papers, it is William who has been the primary architect of the new, unyielding standard of royal conduct. For the Prince of Wales, the survival of the monarchy in a digital, high-scrutiny age is not a matter of public relations, but of structural integrity. He has observed the erosion caused by the Sussex exception and has concluded that the only way to preserve the crown's legitimacy is to move from an era of passive endurance to an era of active, clinical boundary setting. This is the hallmark of a future king who has realized that a monarchy that tries to please everyone, or that allows itself to be treated as a commercial brand, will eventually stand for nothing. The discipline era under William is defined by a singular, non-negotiable principle. The crown is a contract, not a birthright of convenience. In William's view, the prestige and protection offered by the monarchy are granted only in exchange for absolute institutional loyalty and discretion. When that contract is breached, as he believes his brother has done through the commercialization of internal family dynamics, the institutional response must be swift and total. This marks the end of the never complain, never explain era, which William views as too passive for the modern attention economy. In its place, he is installing a proactive media doctrine that treats the monarchy's reputation as a strategic asset to be defended with the same vigor as a national border. Under William, there will be no gray zones and no half-in, half-out arrangements. You are either a working member of the sovereign's team, bound by the rules of the state, or you are a private citizen, with no claim to the crown's symbolic power. This cold clarity is what William believes is necessary to insulate the institution from the volatility of celebrity culture and the grievance industry. Central to William's vision is the concept of the small, functional monarchy. Unlike the sprawling royal family models of the past, William's reign will likely be centered on a tight, disciplined core of senior working royals who reflect the values of service and silent constancy. By stripping Harry's titles and enforcing a total separation, William has removed the last remaining vestige of the celebrity royal model from the institution. This move serves as a warning to all future generations. The crown is a trust held for the people, not a platform for personal branding. For William, this is a long-game strategy designed to protect the inheritance of his children, particularly Prince George. He is willing to endure the short-term pain of a broken family to ensure the long-term stability of the state. He understands that for the monarchy to survive the next century, it must be perceived as a dignified, governing institution rather than a source of tabloid entertainment. This transition from family firm to disciplined institution is William's greatest contribution to the crown's survival. As William prepares for the day he ascends the throne, the public is seeing a man who has sublimated his personal feelings into his constitutional duty. The final decision, signed by his father, is the first major victory for William's new doctrine. It proves that the palace is once again capable of setting its own terms and enforcing its own boundaries. The era of the King of Discipline has effectively begun before the coronation has even taken place. For the British public, this signals a future reign that will be less sentimental, but far more stable. William is not seeking to be loved for his relatability, but to be respected for his reliability and his unwavering commitment to the rules of the crown. The fracture with his brother is the price he is willing to pay for a monarchy that is legible, governed, and above the fray of commercialized drama. In drawing this line in ink, William has not just changed the status of a prince, he has defined the ironclad terms of his own future reign. The strategic genius behind the king's final decision lies not in what was said, but in the profound, calculated silence that has followed. In the high-velocity world of the modern attention economy, where conflict is the primary currency and drama is the essential fuel for growth, the British monarchy has chosen to weaponize the vacuum. By stripping Prince Harry of his titles and enforcing a total structural separation, the palace has moved from a defensive posture to a state of narrative starvation. To understand this shift, one must recognize the asymmetrical nature of the warfare currently being waged between London and California. The Sussex business model is entirely dependent on the royal echo, the process by which a claim from Montecito triggers a reaction from the crown, thereby validating the claim and extending its life cycle in the global media. By cutting off that echo with the cold finality of the Christmas Eve decree, King Charles III and Prince William have effectively collapsed the market value of the Sussex narrative. A monarchy that does not respond is a monarchy that cannot be commodified. This is the ultimate weapon, a refusal to participate in the very economy that seeks to consume you. This new doctrine of silence marks a radical departure from the media strategies of the last century. For decades, the palace attempted to manage its image through carefully curated access and strategic leaks. However, in an era where streaming platforms demand constant escalation and raw emotional content, that model has become a liability. The King's decree signals a return to institutional gravity, the idea that the crown's legitimacy is derived from its silence, its permanence, and its refusal to be relatable. While the Sussexes have traded on the intimacy of their royal connection, the palace is now re-establishing a wall of formal distance that no amount of investigative journalism can breach. This silence is not passive. It is an active, strategic rejection of the celebrity culture that has attempted to infiltrate the royal fold. It sends a message to the world that the monarchy is an ancient, governed entity of the state, not a participant in the ephemeral world of social media trends. By removing the titles, the king has stripped away the symbolic capital that Harry required to bridge the gap between his private life and his commercial ventures. The psychological impact of this strategy on the media landscape is profound. In Hollywood, silence is often interpreted as weakness or a lack of content. But in the context of a constitutional monarchy, silence is a manifestation of supreme authority. It is the silence of a judge who has already passed sentence. For the Sussexes, this creates a relevance vacuum. Without the formal association with the crown, their stories lose their historical weight and become merely anecdotal. They transition from being voices of change within the institution to celebrities talking about a family they are no longer legally part of. Industry insiders suggest that this loss of status is already causing a recalibration of their commercial value. Platforms that once paid for royal proximity are now realizing they have purchased exiled sentiment, a product with a much shorter shelf life. The king's decision has effectively turned the Sussex narrative into a closed chapter, leaving them with the impossible task of sustaining interest in a story that the other side has stopped writing. As the monarchy consolidates its new brand identity around the disciplined constancy of the King, William, and Catherine, the public is witnessing the birth of the governed crown. This is an institution that prioritizes survival over spectacle and duty over display. The final decision was the first step in a long-term plan to de-escalate the royal brand from the heat of tabloid conflict and return it to the cool, steady shade of constitutional service. By drawing this line, the palace has ensured that the next generation of royals will inherit an institution that is less famous but more respected. They have realized that in an age of permanent exposure, the most valuable thing the crown can offer is the one thing the market cannot replicate: a sense of unshakable, silent continuity. The era of the monetized royal is dead. The era of the institutional boundary has begun. In the cold light of this new reality, the silence from London is not an invitation to speak. It is the final word. The immediate aftermath of the king's decree has revealed a profound and perhaps unexpected shift in the collective psyche of the United Kingdom and the broader Commonwealth. For years, media commentators predicted that a harsh move against the Sussexes would trigger a wave of public backlash or a surge in Republican sentiment. Yet, the reality on the ground in late December 2025 tells a far more complex story of institutional stabilization. Early polling data snapshots indicate that while the nation is saddened by the human cost of the fracture, there is a dominant, prevailing sense of relief. The public, it seems, has reached a state of drama fatigue. By providing a fixed reference point, a definitive boundary that cannot be moved, King Charles III has halted the narrative drift that was slowly eroding the crown's authority. People are no longer forced to choose sides in an evolving family dispute. They are now presented with a settled constitutional fact. This transition from volatility to predictability is precisely what the public requires from a sovereign institution. The monarchy has stopped being a source of daily tabloid conflict and has returned to its role as a steady, governed anchor of national identity. This consolidation of support is particularly evident across the Commonwealth. In capitals from Ottawa to Canberra, diplomatic observers and constitutional partners have interpreted the king's move not as a personal rebuke, but as a vital signal of governance. For a monarchy to project soft power on the global stage, it must first demonstrate that it can maintain order within its own ranks. A monarchy that appeared unable to manage its own family dynamics was increasingly seen as a weakened institution, vulnerable to the whims of the attention economy. By asserting his authority and stripping the titles, Charles has reaffirmed the contract of dignity that exists between the crown and the people. The message to the Commonwealth is one of renewed stability. The monarchy is not a celebrity brand subject to the fluctuations of the market, but a pillar of the state that operates by a set of unshakable rules. This clarity has, paradoxically, strengthened the position of the monarchy in countries where Republican debates are most active, as it proves the institution's ability to modernize through discipline rather than through mere appeasement. The psychological shift among the British public is driven by a realization that the Sussex narrative had become corrosive to the social fabric. For 5 years, the constant cycle of allegation and rebuttal served to polarize the public and distract from the monarchy's essential work. The king's final decision has effectively removed the oxygen from this fire. By refusing to engage in further debate and simply setting a limit, the palace has redirected the public's attention back to the working core of the royal family, specifically the disciplined service of William and Catherine. The public's support is now being channeled into a flight to quality, where the silent constancy of the working royals is valued more highly than the vocal truth-telling of those in California. In the eyes of the British people, the king has finally fulfilled his role as the fountain of honor by protecting the prestige of the titles and ensuring they are not used as tools for commercial leverage. Ultimately, this decisive action has achieved what years of PR maneuvering could not. It has reclaimed the moral high ground for the crown. By acting in the interest of the institution's long-term survival, Charles has proven that he is a protector of the state first and foremost. This has resonated deeply with a generation of Britons who value stability and tradition in an increasingly uncertain world. The shock of the announcement has been replaced by a quiet consensus that the line had to be drawn. In choosing the crown over the prince, Charles has not just saved the institution, he has recalibrated the relationship between the monarchy and the people for the next century. The era of the royal reality show is over, and the era of the disciplined Commonwealth has begun. As the nation moves into 2026, the monarchy stands not as a fractured family, but as a consolidated, governed, and newly respected pillar of national life, proving that sometimes the most compassionate act a king can perform is to enforce the law of the crown. The silence following the king's decree has created a profound and chilling vacuum around Prince Harry in California, one that signifies far more than the loss of a mere prefix or a ducal name. It represents the total collapse of the Hollywood mirage, the belief that royal status could be converted into a sustainable celebrity brand without the anchor of institutional duty. To understand Harry's current isolation, one must recognize that his primary currency in the American market was never his personal talent or his specific worldview. It was his proximity to the British crown. By severing that link with surgical finality, King Charles III has not just removed a title, he has removed the symbolic shield that allowed Harry to operate as a high-value entity. In the brutal, performance-driven environment of the entertainment industry, Harry is now discovering the difference between being a prince in exile and being a private citizen with a grievance. The former is a tragic, marketable figure. The latter is simply another participant in a crowded attention economy. The isolation he now faces is not just social or familial, it is structural. He has been evicted from the very historical lineage that gave his life and his stories their weight. The psychological reality of this structural eviction is becoming increasingly apparent as the Sussex brand faces its most significant test of viability. Industry insiders describe a palpable cooling effect across Los Angeles and New York. The king's decision has signaled to the corporate world that the Sussexes no longer speak for or represent any part of the British establishment. This loss of status has an immediate impact on their ability to secure the prestige partnerships that their lifestyle requires. In the cold logic of Hollywood, the Sussexes have transitioned from assets to liabilities. Any further attempt to escalate their narrative against the crown now appears not as a brave quest for truth, but as a desperate struggle for relevance by those who have been legally and formally cast out. This is the price of betrayal, a realization that once you burn the bridge to the palace, you are left stranded on an island of your own making, with no historical architecture to support you. Harry's isolation is compounded by the fact that the very platforms he relied on for his voice are the same platforms that will eventually discard him once the royal content is exhausted. Behind the scenes in Montecito, the realization that there is no back door left open is reportedly shattering the last of Harry's illusions. For years, there was a lingering belief that the king's fatherly affection would always provide a safety net, that the titles were a birthright that no administrative act could truly touch. The Christmas Eve decree has proven that in the battle between the family and the crown always wins. The king's choice to prioritize the defensive architecture of William and Catherine over the feelings of his second son has left Harry in a state of constitutional homelessness. He is no longer part of the great chain of being that defines the British monarchy. This is the most profound form of isolation, to be removed from the continuity of one's own ancestors. The titles were the last thread connecting him to 1,000 years of history. With that thread cut, he is adrift in a modern world that prizes novelty over tradition. The private citizen, Harry now faces a future where he must build a legacy from scratch, without the benefit of the royal shadow he spent so much energy trying to escape. As the global media begins to treat the Sussex conflict as a closed chapter, the isolation of the prince serves as a powerful deterrent for any future royal who might consider a similar path. The palace has successfully demonstrated that the monarchy is an all-or-nothing institution. You cannot trade on its symbolism while rejecting its discipline. This finality has stripped Harry of his most potent weapon, the threat of what he might say next. Because he is no longer an insider, his revelations have lost their institutional authority and have been downgraded to the status of celebrity gossip. The crown has effectively deplatformed a prince. This is the cold governing reality of the New Caroline era. The institution is protected, the succession is insulated, and those who seek to monetize its secrets are left in the silent, unforgiving cold of the outside world. Harry's journey from the heart of the palace to the periphery of Hollywood is now complete, proving that while a prince can leave the crown can also leave the prince. As the final lights are extinguished at Buckingham Palace, on the night of the 24th of December 2025, the world is witnessing not just the conclusion of a turbulent year, but the definitive dawn of a new monarchical era, the age of discipline and redefinition. King Charles III's final decision regarding Harry's titles was never merely an act of punishment or a personal retaliation. It was a profound constitutional surgery designed to save the very soul of the crown. The legacy of this decision will be recorded in history as the new Sandringham Doctrine, where the boundary between public duty and private ambition is drawn with a sharp, irreversible stroke. The message to the United Kingdom and the world is unmistakable. The monarchy is not a commodity for trade, nor is it a stage for individual psychological dramas. It is a national institution that exists on a foundation of absolute sacrifice and loyalty. By removing the destabilizing elements from California, the king has reconstructed a monarchy that is more focused, transparent, and resolute than ever before. Looking deep into the future, this event has cleared the path for a stable and secure transition of power to the generation of Prince William. The barriers of ambiguity that had eroded royal prestige for 5 years have finally been dismantled. William and Catherine now stand at the center of an entity that has been insulated from the waves of entertainment media attacks. This reconstruction does not make the monarchy colder. It makes it legible, clearer, and more understandable in the eyes of the public. The people no longer have to wonder who is truly serving the nation and who is serving a multi-million-dollar media contract. Trust is being rebuilt on a bedrock of stability and unchanging values. For future generations, from Prince George to Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, this is the first and most vital lesson on the price of the crown. Power comes with constraint, and glory is only earned through discipline. For Prince Harry, this final chapter brings a bitter, profound silence. As the titles vanish and the institutional boundaries are set, he is no longer a rebel within the system, but simply an individual standing outside of history. This isolation is the inevitable result of a flawed attempt to reconcile two irreconcilable worlds, the dignity of the sovereign and the noise of Hollywood. The lesson of the Sussex mirage will serve as a permanent warning to any who believe they can monetize their royal origins without undermining the very institution that granted them. The palace did not choose to fight with allegations. They fought by becoming a fortress of silence and duty. In the war between drama and institution, the institution won by simply refusing to play the game. As we conclude this analysis, it is clear that the United Kingdom has entered 2026 with a renewed sense of cohesion. The family fracture, however painful, has become a milestone for the monarchy to self-reflect and evolve. King Charles III has proven that, while a man of deep paternal emotion, he is a decisive sovereign when faced with the survival of the dynasty. The crown has redrawn its boundaries, not in anger, but with the ink and seal of duty. In the stillness after the storm, we see a monarchy that no longer has to run or explain, but a monarchy that leads. The end of ambiguity is the beginning of a new dignity. The United Kingdom has seen the limit of tolerance, and now they are seeing the strength of constancy. The story of the titles has closed, but the story of a sustainable and disciplined monarchy has only just begun.